Help MythVision keep bringing you material by becoming a Patreon member, as well as PayPal. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. We are MythVision. Your host, Derek Lambert. Thank you for joining, checking out this show. I have Jim Majors with us today. How's it going, brother?
Hey, Derek, it's going good, man. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, man. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to this show. I'm going to be learning a lot from you on the martyrdom of the apostles and the ideas of persecution and things like that with them. You know, it's a common thing. But before we do, I want to let everyone know that Jim Majors here is a PhD candidate in Oklahoma, has a master's in theology on New Testament studies. He is writing his dissertation on Daniel and should present it sometime within the next year or so, give or take. COVID's a pain in the butt, and he's working on this. So I've talked to him on the phone, and we had a pretty good, long conversation. He knows a thing or two. Trust me. And so you guys, make sure you go down in the description. He has a YouTube channel. He's trying to grow. You can subscribe and go like his videos, comment on his videos, show him support. And he's on Twitter at the Jim Majors. It's one word, at the Jim Majors. And that'll be in the description as well. You guys can check him out. So, Jim,
Awesome,
we were
man.
both
Thanks
Christians,
so
man.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to be here, man. I really enjoyed our conversation and looking forward to getting into this.
Yeah, you started scratching the surface, and I was like, pump the brakes. We got too much. This is too good to not be recording. And I decided let's really jump on this. You're going to be, I hope, a reoccurring guest on this channel, and to help grow your channel, of course, too, because this information needs to get out there. You are in the framework of scholarship here. And so what you try to stick with is the up-to-date peer-reviewed literature, up-to-date consensus on topics and ideas, and testing things. Not saying you necessarily side with everything that comes out, but you are reading it. You are sticking to what's going on currently. And we were both Christians at one point.
Yeah, that's correct. I was Pentecostal. I was a Pentecostal pastor. I went to seminary as a Christian.
Wow. So did you do the whole gibberish thing?
Yeah, I've spoken tongues. First time I spoke in tongues, I was 14 years old. And then, well, before I spoke in tongues, I remember going to my grandparents' church one summer, and they lived in Texas. I was in southern Louisiana at this time, and they were Southern Baptist, and went to their church and, sat down, and the opening hymn was Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. And dude, that was my jam. Like I get up, everybody stands up. I start clapping my hands. All I had was a piano. They didn't have a guitar and a tambourine and people stomping, like in the Pentecostal church. They didn't have no drums, but we had a lot of bass. But all it was just an organ, just a piano, and playing Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. But I start singing and clapping my hands and put my hands up in the air and start feeling the Holy Ghost, coming on me. And then I'm looking around, and everybody's looking at me like I'm a frog, man. Like, what is this kid doing? And I was like, well, why aren't these people worshiping? What is going on here? And that was the first little loop that threw me there, was actually just experiencing another Christian worship service.
I was in the same boat, very young when I started too. They were like, the utterances will just come, but I'm listening to them do it. And they're going, come on.
Did they ever grab your head and shake it and say, let loose?
I think that we've done that. A lot of times we did that when we were trying to cast out demons, because they considered demons. Yeah, like the way that they looked at demons and spirits was like, if you had a masturbation problem, or if you had like a anger problem, that was a spirit. So everything had a spirit. It wasn't like, and most people don't get this, like, especially even like other Christians that don't even know this, like everything is spiritual, everything. And so we were like casting out, I'm going to leave you, spirit of lust, spirit of gluttony, spirit of lie, all that kind of stuff. And so everything had a freaking spirit. Like they had a different book for this.
if you got caught doing something, if you got caught backsliding on Saturday, on Sunday, man, people were around you laying hands on you and praying for you and Some of them even beating you with pillowcases.
so,
Weird stuff, man.
so my question, and I had this conversation with you on the phone briefly, was on martyrdom. I
Yeah.
really am fascinated with this topic because Christian apologetics are often deployed to uh, use the example of saying, would someone really die for something they knew wasn't true? And that's usually how they frame it. They frame it in a way where they don't really open up the conversation. And really, I could give examples, like even if martyrdom was true, I can give examples of martyrdom from jihadists that do
Yeah.
things in the name of their God, that believe what they're doing is true. And so even if at the end of the day, before we even get into the mythology of some of the stuff and some of the exaggerated claims and all that, I just wanted to point out, if you at the end of the day say, no, I really think all these people were martyred, blah, 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 it doesn't change a thing. It doesn't. Cognitive dissonance could easily play a huge role in why people do what they do. But anyway.
No, yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, the Christian apologists, they like to ask, or they like to use the excuse or the apologetic. Well, the apostles wouldn't die for a lie. They wouldn't die for something that they knew to be a lie. Um, and they just assume that all the apostles were martyred. Why? Because that's what it takes for them to have their belief. That's tradition. People believe a lot of things for unjustified reasons, and a lot of it is church tradition, and a lot of it, I mean, we're going to get into right now. A lot of Christians that believe in the martyrdom of the apostles, they they don't know what source it's from. They don't know what it's dated to. They don't know the manuscript evidence that we have for it, the manuscript tradition that we have for it, or anything else about the text. They don't care that it's apocryphal or whatever. It's just because it's church tradition.
And you found some serious strange things, discrepancies, issues, which anyone who reads as far and as wide as you have and sees these things will probably scratch their head too. Most Christians stay within the framework of the canon, of course, but there's so much more out there. And we were talking about Papias, and it was like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, the exaggerated claims this guy comes up with about
Yes.
Judas and all these things. So, can we start somewhere with with some of these exaggerated claims, or some of the things you'd like to bring that you've investigated in this field?
Sure. So I've put together all of the information that I've had. I've done a video on this before. It was a live stream, so it was like 3 hours long. It was ridiculous. I don't even think I got through the whole thing.
Ooh.
So I just want to say, when it comes to determining the historicity of the martyrdom of the apostles, there are so many different sources from so many different people, and they're telling us so many different things, and they're all spread out across a broad timeline. So for simplicity's sake, I've attempted to divide, when applicable, the information into four different categories that we get. So we got the New Testament tradition, if it does appear in the New Testament, for the martyrdom of an apostle. The church tradition, what is traditionally accepted as the place, time, and method of martyrdom, if at all. The earliest references to it, to the traditional explanation, and then later legendary developments. Um, so Sean McDowell wrote a book called "The Fate of the Apostles." Sean McDowell's a Christian apologist, but this is probably one of my favorite books on the apostles, or on martyrdom, persecution of early Christianity, anything like that. This is a really, really good book. Um, and I just want to quote something in there.
Okay.
And Sean McDowell says that the willingness of the apostles to face persecution and martyrdom indicates their sincere conviction that Jesus appeared to them after his death. And he goes on to say, the apostles' willingness to die for their belief does not demonstrate the inherent truth of the Christian message, but that the apostles really believed that Jesus had risen from the grave.
Right.
And later in the book, he says, to be honest, talking about the martyrdom of Peter. He says, to be honest, the historical evidence is late, it's legend filled, and contradictory for the rest of the apostles.
And this is a Christian.
Yes, a Christian apologist. He's not some secular Christian or some critical
or liberal Christian.
Right,
you know?
right. Not a critical scholar at all. Very, very conservative.
See, this fascinates me because it gets right to the heart of the issue. I mean, everyone who looks at this goes, would they really die for this? Well, let me ask you this. And I know that let's not spend 3-4 hours if we can trying to go into some of this. I'm sure you have it diluted down. We can give a summary. We can do deeper focus topics, on this subject and do a video series, but go ahead.
I just remember that quote. It wasn't about just Peter, but Peter, James, and Paul. Those are the three that Sean McDowell thinks that we have good evidence to suggest that they were killed. They were, he says, martyred, but I'm going to get into why it's not martyrdom later on. But he says that besides that, the historical evidence is late, it's legend filled, and it's contradictory for the rest of the apostles. So all the apostles besides Peter, James, and Paul.
Let's center on them for now, because it's obvious you even have discrepancies here, like unbelievable tales about Paul's death you gave a hint at yesterday, and I'm like, okay, take us through some of this if you don't mind.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do Peter and I'll do James, but I'm going to save Paul for last because it's just too good, man.
Okay.
Okay, so Peter, also called Simon Peter or Simon Bar Yonah, it was later given the name Cephas by Jesus. It's from the Aramaic for rock or stone, Kepha, which is translated in Greek as Petros, and then translated into English, Simon Petros, Simon Petros became Simon Peter. He was the brother of Andrew. The earliest reference to his death, or what could be said to be his martyrdom, is John 21:18. Is the only New Testament reference to his death or to his martyrdom. It says supposedly it's Jesus predicting the crucifixion of Peter. And Jesus says, "Verily, truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." But so traditionally, Peter is said to have been crucified upside down in Rome. The earliest reference that we have to that is, so John doesn't say anything about crucifixion, just says that somebody's going to take you where you do not want to go. And then not until the 2nd century in the Acts of Peter, the apocryphal Acts of Peter, do we get that. We have earlier references that talk about that just say that he was crucified, but the tradition was that he was crucified upside down. So that's the Acts of Peter. It's late 2nd century. So it has this really funny dialogue in there. It says, "As he went forth to the city, he saw the Lord entering into Rome." So Peter's going into the city to be crucified. Or I'm sorry, no, he's just going into Rome, and he's going into Rome, and he sees Jesus, and it says, "And when he saw him, he said, Lord, whither goest thou thus or here?" So he's saying, "Lord, where are you going?" And the Lord said unto him, "I go into Rome to be crucified." And Peter said unto him, "Lord, art thou being crucified again?" He said unto him, "Yea, Peter, I am being crucified again." And Peter came to himself, and having beheld the Lord ascending up into heaven, he returned to Rome, rejoicing and glorifying the Lord, and said, "I am being crucified." So the prediction in John 21 says that someone will put a belt around you and take you where you do not go. And in the earliest tradition, or in the earliest textual evidence, or in the earliest text that backs up the tradition of him being crucified upside down in the Acts of Peter, he's not being drug kicking and screaming where he doesn't want to go. He is joyfully walking into Rome, throwing his hands up, saying, "I'm being crucified," because he gets to follow Jesus.
Wow. So that, to me, you got to scratch that one off the evidence. When Josh McDowell makes this argument, so to speak, he needs to back up for a second and not use that. So all he has is John. What else is there to bolster this claim that Peter died and we can know he was martyred for believing in this?
Right. Well, it doesn't say that he was killed for his belief. It doesn't say that he was killed for being a Christian.
Hmm.
Um, uh, Origen agrees with the method. He's from the early third. He's writing in the early third century. He agrees that Peter was crucified upside down, and he said it was because Peter felt unworthy to be crucified in the same manner as his Lord, and so at his own request was crucified with his head downward. But I believe in the Acts of Peter it says something about him coming into the world head first or head down, and that's he wanted to get that perspective again.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. What the heck? He's happy
Right.
to die, but then what's also strange is Jesus is being crucified again. It's like, what the heck?
Yeah. Like he came down to earth and no ministry or anything. He just felt like reliving old times.
Let me just get crucified again, Bucky. All
Yeah,
right.
I forgot what it felt like. I just wanted to get, just wanted to. I haven't stretched that good in a long time. I just need to get that stretch out.
Do you think Origin's looking at the what is this? Which document is this? That the Acts of Peter?
The Acts of Peter.
Is he looking at this? You think? Or is
Almost
this not?
certainly he's aware of it.
Okay.
I mean, it was written around the time he was born. Actually, probably a little bit before the time he was born. I don't see why he wouldn't be aware of it. It was a fairly popular text.
Before we get into anything else on this, I just want to ask: is the church relying on these pseudepigraphical writings to bolster their tradition?
Yes. Sometimes you'll have later medieval renditions of it. You'll have fifth, sixth, seventh, even later renditions where they just completely change it but keep the core tradition. Just because they don't want it to be associated with a heretical apocryphal text.
They can't let go, can they? Wow. It's like we talked about with the preterism the other day, the kingdom of God. And if it didn't physical manifest, man, we got to keep this kingdom of God thing. How can we make it work? You know what I mean?
One of the early church fathers, Eusebius, in the 4th century, he is actually really against these apocryphal texts, and he talks against them. But whenever he speaks against them, he almost always first records the story and then changes some things, and then he says, "Oh, they're heretical and they're untrustworthy. We can't trust these texts." So he does that with the Acts of Acts of Peter, and he does that with several more. I'll point them out as we go along.
Okay.
Let's see. So who was next?
James.
James. Okay. So let's see. James, the son of Zebedee. So James, the son of Zebedee, brother of John, son of Zebedee. The traditional view is that he was beheaded with a sword by King Herod Agrippa I in Jerusalem in the year 44 CE, just before the day of Passover. So the earliest is found in Acts 12 verses 1 through 2. It says, "It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword." There was no mention of the crime or and given an option to recant or anything like that. Papias talks about him later, but the Acts of the Apostles is really the only reference that we have to that. It's some say that it's implied in the Gospel of Mark. So this is number 2 on Sean McDowell's list of the top 3 that he believes most likely are historical. So we had Peter, James, and then we have Paul next, but we're gonna save Paul.
All right. Now, this is not James, the brother of Jesus, or is it?
So
It gets confusing. I know.
right. So there's several people that are named James in early Christian history and in the New Testament text. There's a lot of uncertainty over who is which because of the identification. There's actually inconsistencies amongst the Gospels. He's usually called James the Greater, and then you have James the Less, who is the son of Alphaeus. Is what he's known as. And James, son of Alphaeus, is the one who was traditionally known as the brother of Jesus. And if he is the brother of Jesus, he was stoned by Pharisees, according to Josephus and Hippolytus. Um, they both say that he was stoned. But really, Hippolytus is just seconding Josephus. Hippolytus is aware of Josephus. He's just amening Josephus.
Like
So as to the
Tacitus and
historicity of that, I
Suetonius.
mean, we really don't know, but there's not a whole lot of tradition to compare it to. So it's one of the most consistent.
Makes sense. That does make sense. So what happened to this guy? You were talking about James, and this guy was beheaded.
Yes, James, the son of Zebedee. Yeah, he was supposedly beheaded with a sword by King Herod Agrippa I in Jerusalem in the year 44 CE, just before the day of Passover. They get really specific with it.
Okay, dig into this one because I keep thinking of John the Baptist being beheaded, and I keep thinking about Paul's supposed, situation. Like it's weird. Is everybody getting beheaded and stoned to death out here, or what? And some are crucified, so it's like okay.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of variance in it. Like I said, there's a lot of different traditions. I mean, but what I've split up into is like, what is the church tradition? The church tradition is that he was beheaded by the sword, by Herod Agrippa. We have that we have Acts to back it up. But other than that, I mean, not a whole lot. I mean, we don't have anything that we can say, this is absolutely historical. I mean, we have Josephus, but we know how reliable, that tends to be. And then Hippolytus is really just using Josephus as a primary source.
And are these the only sources that we have of anything mentioning this same James, or are there some crazier later ones that change the story or have a different opinion? Or
there's some spurious ones that talk about his life and things like that, but as to his martyrdom specifically, that's really all that I picked out were the ones that specifically hinted towards martyrdom or death of some sort. You have so that was James, the son of Zebedee. Then you have his brother John, son of Zebedee. So the earliest one that we have to him is the same reference that was given to James, son of Zebedee. It's implied in the Gospel of Mark. Then you have Papias that says that he was martyred. It doesn't say how he was martyred or anything like that. Then you have the Acts of John. It was written about 50 years after Papias would have written. Of course, we don't have any existing texts of Papias, but the Acts of John are written around at the end of the 2nd century, like 170 to 200, somewhere around there. And they say that he died a natural death in Ephesus of old age. And then you have Tertullian. Tertullian is writing at the end of the 2nd century as well, and he says that John was, and this is the church tradition, Tertullian says that John was sentenced to death by Emperor Domitian, and he was to be boiled to death in a vat of oil. Like they would heat the vat up until it was boiling, and to get oil to boil, it's like twice the temperature that it takes water. So it has to be twice as hot as water to boil. That's like twice the boiling point. So it's super hot. And then they have a huge crowd around. They lower John into the vat, and nothing. He just chill. And then he starts praising God, and then he starts praying, and then he starts blessing everybody. Then he starts preaching to everybody. So he's gathering a larger crowd. So seconds, minutes go by, and so finally they pull him out, and they just give up. And so instead, Domitian sends him in exile to the Isle of Patmos, where he allegedly wrote Revelation, and eventually, according to tradition, another emperor, a later emperor, pardoned John, and he was able to live to a very old age, in his late 90s, according to tradition, and he died a natural death. He was not martyred at all.
Dang, he didn't get the lucky, glorious ending all the other guys got.
Right, and this is supposedly the beloved disciple. This is Jesus' beloved. This is supposed to be his right hand man.
Dude, I can't imagine that oil though. I mean, like,
right.
It's like a Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego rewrite, so to speak. You know?
Yeah, but I don't know. I think I'd rather the furnace.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's quicker. Let's just go ahead and get it over with.
Oh man, but I mean, imagine being lowered in feet first. Like you find out it's hot like way before it kills you.
Dude, I can't imagine something like that. But it
I
also
think I'd
makes
have to request them to do me Peter style and just flip me.
I'm probably reading too much into this, but it reminds me of the fiery lake furnace that Zoroastrianism has, where the righteous are dipped into the fire, but it's like milk. It's like warm milk to them. It's like nothing.
Right. It refines them.
Yeah, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. It's like it doesn't do anything bad, and so I don't know if that. I mean, I could be reading way into that. I'm just throwing it out there that. Who knows?
I mean, I'm no expert because of Zoroastrianism. I mean, I read it just as a hobby, as a side thing. I'm some scholarly text, but I mean, I don't really get into the research side of it. But I mean, it sounds right. There's a couple of other sources that mention John and how he died. The Acts of John the Theologian is written sometime after the 3rd century, between the 3rd and the 5th century. It couldn't really find a good dating on that. Say that he just vanished, just gone, just disappeared. Nobody ever heard from him again. And of course, Tertullian says that he died a natural death. Polycrates of Ephesus in the late 2nd century, writing about the time Tertullian, maybe a little bit before, says a natural death in Ephesus, that he died a natural death. Irenaeus in the mid to late 2nd century, a little bit before Polycrates, said natural death in Ephesus. So this is one of the more consistent ones. However, they don't say that he was boiled in a vat of oil first. That's something later. And there's other spurious texts that talk about how he was tortured in other ways. Somebody tried to flay him and they couldn't, and a bunch of other things, but way too spurious.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. They peeled the skin off slowly or something like,
Yeah.
of someone.
They tried to, but I think they couldn't cut his skin or something like that.
What the heck? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So are you ready for a crazy one?
That's exactly what I was about to say. I'm like, okay, go ahead and drop the bomb on us.
I'm gonna throw you a good one. It's almost as good, but not quite.
Okay. Go ahead.
So we got Philip, right? He was hung upside down. He was crucified upside down. He was hung by the iron hooks through his ankles. It says that he was hung on a tree with irons in his heels and ankles, not like on, but in. This was by the Romans in Hierapolis, and it wasn't because he was a Christian, but it's because he had this conflict with these snake worshippers. They worshiping this snake deity in Hierapolis, and so while he's upside down, he curses everyone, and in this massive chasm, this massive hole opens up, and it swallows the proconsul who crucified him, the viper temple, the priest of the temple, and everybody, like, and 7,000 men that were around the temple, and plus women and children. And this is where Philip is crucified as well, being hung upside down, and the hole closes up. And then Jesus appears. It gets better. Jesus appears, and he says, "Philip, you shouldn't have done that. I'm going to punish you. I will not allow you into heaven for 40 days after you die today. For 40 days, you will be tortured outside of the gates of heaven, and then you may come in."
Dude, that's so ridiculous.
Isn't it? Like, he didn't have a problem destroying pagan stuff in the Old Testament. Like, Philip thought it was cool. I mean,
Yeah. Like, dude, what happened? You and your dad were on the same page, I thought.
right.
And
Right.
I love that meme. There's a funny meme with Jesus praying, and he's like,
Right.
"Dear Father, me, you," or some crap, like he is his own father that he's praying to
Right.
himself. But no, yeah, it's so funny how he changes his mind, so to speak, by acting like that's a problem. At the same time, I could see some wishy-washy stuff, because I think God was mad at Moses for throwing the tablets, but maybe he was just mad that he broke the tablets. Like, dude, I already wrote them once. Screw the guys that got killed down there that were worshiping Baal, but
Right.
or the
Exactly.
golden calf. I'm sorry,
You know how sore this finger gets?
dude. I can only do this once, man. I can't believe you made me do. It reminds me of that Joseph Smith thing, like
Yeah.
when the woman burns the papers, which I'm doing a series on right now.
Oh man.
The wife of the man burns the 116 pages that they wrote of the first Nephi or whatever, and she's like, "Well, if he's really from God, he should be able to write it again." And Joseph was like, "Can't believe you did that." "I can't, because the enemy's already got a hold of it and made up some BS story, of
Yeah.
why he can't write it
Right.
again." So
Right.
anyway, I just rabbit trailed out of there, but
So Philip, it was, just to recap, Philip hung by his ankles by irons, through his Achilles tendon, upside down from a tree outside of this serpent temple. He caused the hole to open up. 7,000 men plus women and the priests and the whole temple fell into the hole, and it closes back up. He dies, goes to heaven, and gets tortured for 40 days, and then is allowed through the gates into paradise, which, when it's eternity, 40 days is nothing, right?
right.
And then in the other sources that we have, it's Clement of Alexandria, who's quoting Heracleon, and Eusebius, who is quoting Polycrates of Ephesus, and they both say that Philip died naturally, wasn't martyred, anything like that. But the tradition is that he was crucified upside down, but they do not like to go into detail. This is one of my favorite ones to bring up. I say, well, do you know how the Apostle Philip was martyred? And they say, well, most of them don't know, but every once in a while you'll get somebody who'll say, yeah, he was crucified. He was crucified upside down, like Peter was. And say, well, what else? Well, what do you mean? Well, what about the hole that swallowed the temple and 7,000 men plus women and children? And they just look at you like they don't
I
know
don't
if
know.
you're joking. They don't know if this is a joke or if you're serious. Like, they kind of half want to institutionalize you and half want to be very afraid for their faith.
Yeah. That's what usually happens when you start bringing up stuff like this. And of course, what you're going to be saying about Paul, which is like, goodness gracious.
So I'll go through the next ones really quick.
Okay.
Bartholomew, traditionally he was skinned alive. He was flayed alive.
That was the one I was talking about, by the way.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
right. um, other traditions. So the earliest one the earliest mention of that for the tradition is the Acts of Philip, and it's from like the 4th century to 5th century. And he wasn't just flayed, he wasn't just skinned alive, he was also crucified. And in some accounts he is just crucified. In some accounts he is flayed alive and then crucified and then beheaded. In some he is drowned. He's put in a bag. The bag's tied up, filled with stones, and they throw it in the water, and they drown him.
What?
Yeah. In the Martyrdom of Bartholomew, it's a mid 5th, early 6th century text. It says that he was beheaded in India by King Astrages. It's written in a pseudo Hippolytus text. It's like 3rd century. But just totally different stuff. Yeah, so that's all over the place. Thomas, Thomas is called Didymus in John 21:2. He's called he's called Didymus because he's called Didymus there in John, and in the Acts of Thomas. It's an early to mid 3rd century text. He says that Thomas calls him Didymus, Thomas the twin, but the twin of who? You know who he's supposed to be the twin of?
Jesus, right?
Yeah, and that's where it comes from, is the Acts of Thomas.
Oh.
Yeah, and that early to mid 3rd century apocryphal text.
Okay. What did John mean then?
What's that?
John mentions this, right?
Right.
The Gospel of John.
Well, I mean, people argue about it, probably about Jesus. That's kind of what just because it's such a late development. I mean, there's a lot of being spilled over whose twin Thomas is. But traditionally, Thomas is killed with spears in India. He's run through with spears. That's in the Acts of Thomas. So the earliest source for the church tradition of how he was martyred is from like 250, 260-ish. And the earliest mention is from the late 2nd century from Clement of Alexandria. Which is quoting Heracleon, says that he died a natural death. And this is the Acts of Thomas is one of the texts that Eusebius pops up and says that's not right. That's heresy. Those are lies and exaggerations.
So it seems like Eusebius sides with these other guys who talk about natural death more often than the other ones, right. But he still has his picks where he's like, no, I agree with this one and this one, but I don't agree with that one.
But it seems strange though, that the ones that have a church tradition, but the earlier ones, especially Clement of Alexandria, when they're quoting Heracleon, one of the earliest early church fathers references to the martyrdom of the apostles says that he died a natural death. That it's earlier. It's almost like the martyrdom of the apostles was something important to the 2nd, 3rd century Christian community, more likely the late 3rd century Christian community. And so Clement of Alexandria is saying that they died a natural death just wasn't cutting it. They had to come up with something. And if you're going to come up with a lie, I mean, let's make it a good one, right? Like, I didn't catch a fish this big. Like, it was a pretty big fish.
Yeah.
And it had a little man in it who was there for 3 days. His name was Jonah.
Right. Oh my gosh.
So you got Matthew. Matthew's real famous. He's called Levi, also the son of Alphaeus. He's called the son of Alphaeus in Mark, and just Levi in Luke. He's a tax collector. He was, whenever we're looking at the sources of the martyrdom, he was confused for for Matthias, uh, they so the, they would often conflate the two, Matthew and Matthias, as if they were one and the same. Um, let's see, the tradition of Matthew is that he was martyred in Ethiopia, that he was stabbed in the back by a sword, and that's from the 6th, 7th century. It's uh, a pseudepigraphal text, supposedly it's allegedly written by Abdias in the 6th, 7th century. But it wasn't. And then you have the only other sources that we have for his martyrdom is that he was burned in present day eastern Crimea, in what they call Marmadonia, or you might see it called Myrna. And he was burned to death by and this city was supposedly, according to tradition, was uh, a cannibalistic city, a cannibalistic society, and he was burned to death. It doesn't sound like he was burned to death. It sounds like they put the fire out at one point and had some dinner.
Ooh. They were having the Lord's disciple supper. It's pretty much what they were doing.
Right.
They were eating his flesh and drinking his blood in a whole different.
Oh man.
Wow.
Oh, Heracleon is whenever Heracleon is mentioning the apostles' martyrdom, and um, you have earlier your church. Oh, shit. um, damn it. What was I saying? Oh, Heracleon. All right. Okay. So Heracleon differentiates between Levi and Matthew. Heracleon is quoted by later church fathers. Is quoted by Clement of Alexandria. That's where we get a lot of these earlier martyrdom traditions, especially of like the natural deaths. So Clement of Alexandria quotes Heracleon a lot. So Clement of Alexandria notices that instead of identifying Levi as Matthew, they use them as two separate people. So they both have the same tradition of martyrdom, according to Heracleon, which is a late 2nd century. Let's see. Okay, James, son of Alphaeus. We're almost there. There's a 3rd century pseudo Hippolytus text, the same one that I've mentioned earlier, and some of the other ones, because a lot of these texts mention the martyrdom or the death of all of the apostles, or some of them, and the tradition, and that tradition is that he was stoned in Jerusalem. And this is like where the differences and the identification problems come up with was James the one who was stoned by the Pharisees mentioned by Josephus, or is he not? Because I mean, if you look at like Protestant churches or like Eastern Orthodox churches, in their tradition, they don't accept the identification of James as the brother of Jesus, or at least the vast majority of them don't. So this is by and large, for the majority, a Catholic thing that identifies James, son of Alphaeus, with the brother of Jesus. Let's see, he's mentioned in Mark as the son of Mary and Clopas. That's doesn't really touch too many nerves. Let's see, he has a 5th century source, or a 5th century mention of him in his martyrdom. It's a Hieronymian martyrology. It's a 5th century text. It says that he was crucified in Persia. So far we have a 3rd century, a 5th century. There's a 9th century text from Nicetas David. who says that he was martyred in Egypt. Doesn't say how. And if he is indeed the brother of Jesus, then he was stoned by the Pharisees in Jerusalem. So you've got Hippolytus in the third and Josephus saying that he was stoned by Pharisees in Jerusalem. Then you've got a 5th century text saying that he was crucified in Persia. So crucified and stoned, two totally different things. Persia, two totally different places. A 9th century text saying that he was just martyred in Egypt. So it's
nobody can figure out what the heck's going on.
Right.
Let's make sure he was killed everywhere, just to make sure he was killed. We just want to make sure they know he was killed.
Right.
Put him everywhere, though.
And then if he is indeed the one that is identified with that Josephus is mentioning, there's a whole other slew of sources of saying, well, he wasn't just stoned, he was buried, or he had a heavy stone placed on his stomach, and people stood on it and crushed him, and then they picked him up and made him dig a hole, and he got in it waist deep, and they filled it up and they stoned him. So I mean, and then, or they threw him from a pinnacle, and then they stoned him, and then they hit him with a club. There's just a whole lot of variances there. Then you've got Jude, who's called Thaddeus, or Judas, son of James in Luke. You've got the 5th century Hieronymian martyrology that says that he was martyred in Swinar, Persia. It doesn't say how. Then you've got a 5th century text, the Greek Acts of Jude, that says that he died a natural death in Syria. Then you've got the same pseudo-Hippolytus text that we mentioned earlier from the 3rd century that says that he died a natural death in Asia Minor. So martyred in Persia, natural death in Syria, natural death in Asia Minor, and the tradition says that he was clubbed to death.
Flip a coin, guys. It's probably none of them.
I mean, I think you need to roll a dice at this point. We got more than 2 choices.
That's a good idea. Yeah, nope, great point. Great point. Pick a card.
Jeez.
How about that? Wow.
Simon the Zealot, a lot of people don't even know he was an apostle. They're like, Simon the Zealot, I don't remember that one. It's like, Harry, Lou, and was it Mo, Larry, Curly, and Todd? Everybody's like, well, Todd? Who was Todd? He's often confused for Simon Peter, son of Jonah. Mark calls him Simon the Canaan, or Canaan. Let's see, we have a couple of different sources. We have the Hieronymian martyrology from the 5th century that says that he was martyred in Persia, just the same as Jude. You've got the a text that is supposedly by Dorotheus, part of Dorotheus's synopsis, but it's actually a pseudepigraphal text. It's a 6th century that says that Simon the Zealot was crucified, slain, and buried in Britain. Okay, so far we got martyred in Persia and crucified, slain, and buried in Britain, and they're less than 100 years apart. And within the same 100 years, all 3 texts within 100 years authorship, you've got Moshe of Corinne, his History of Armenia. It's a late 5th century text. He says, as to Simon, who was sent into Persia, I cannot relate with certainty what he did, nor where he suffered martyrdom. It is said that one Simon, an apostle, was martyred at Viriaspore. So at least Moshe of Corinne is being honest here. So we got martyred at Viriaspore, martyred at Persia, or crucified and buried in Britain.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is fascinating. And even if they wanted to know, they couldn't know by now. There's just too much. It's already muddied water that no one can know. So the sad part about this is, Jim, and we haven't even gotten to the juicy, is that if we really wanted to know, we can't. Not with certainty at all. There's no way. People have fabricated so much that it just it messes it up.
I mean, you can see why Sean McDowell can only claim, like a maximum of 3, and that's pushing it,
Hmm.
pushing it. Some people push 4, but I mean, okay, this next one's gonna be really quick. Ready? Judas Iscariot, next, was not martyred. Actually, so far, none of these guys have been martyred. None of these guys were killed for being a Christian. You got Matthias. Matthias replaced Judas as the 12th apostle in Acts 1:26. They cast lots between Joseph or Barsabbas or Justus, depending on what translation you're looking at. And Matthias, and the lot fell on Matthias, so he won. And we don't know a whole lot about him. We know we have a 3rd century pseudo Hippolytus text called "On the 12 Apostles of Christ" that says that he died of natural causes in Jerusalem, and it's one of our only sources, like our only good source. And according to tradition, all we know is that he preached in the land of the cannibals. So it could be a confusion with Matthew, or he might have, there might be just been a lot of cannibals around.
Sounds like it.
Um, and then way later, you've got a 14th century historian, that says that he was crucified in Colchis, which is like the country in the country Georgia, like modern day Georgia. And then around 300 years later, in the 17th century, you've got a historian named Louis de Tignemont who says that he was stoned and then beheaded in Jerusalem. And but oddly enough, if you want the truth, I went to the Catholic Encyclopedia and got the truth. It says, quote, "All information concerning Matthias's life and death is vague and contradictory."
There you
So,
go.
there you go. We got it.
Dang. Okay.
Okay, you ready, buddy?
Oh my gosh.
Here we go.
Yes.
All
Hold on.
right.
Let's drum roll.
The Apostle Paul. Tradition. According to tradition, he was beheaded in Rome in 67 CE. It's really, really particular on that date. Some say 67, 69. It's usually right around in there. So the Acts of Paul is a late 2nd century text. It is the earliest text that actually says how he died. And I'm going to read you an excerpt from it, from the Acts of Paul as an English translation. It says, "Then Paul stood with his face to the east and lifted his hands into heaven and prayed a long time. And in his prayer he conversed in the Hebrew tongue with the fathers, and then he stretched forth his neck without speaking. And when the executioner struck off his head, milk, milk, spurted upon the cloak of the soldier. And the soldier and all that were present, when they saw it, marveled and glorified God, which had given such glory unto Paul. And they went and told Caesar what was done."
Milk.
Yep, it's the second century. Um,
Wow.
and then that's actually not the full tradition, though, because the full tradition actually didn't finish developing until the 5th or 6th century. So as the legend develops, by the 6th century, you have this new tradition where not only did milk come out of his neck instead of blood, but at the moment that Paul was decapitated, his head rolled and bounced 3 times on the ground. 1, 2, 3, and freshwater springs, sprung up wherever it bounced. So 3 of them in a row. And the first textual evidence we have of this is in a document by Pope Gregory the Great in the late 6th century. But you have the building of this church was like in the 5th century, and there was already a pre-existing tradition of this bouncing head. So we know it's probably a 5th century development. But there are 3 springs there in a row. You can go to the church. You can see that they're covered. They have plates covering them, but you can put your ear to it. You can hear the water. I've seen them. I've touched them. They are real springs, And this church, well, actually, it's a whole monastery. It's like 3 or 4 separate churches that were built over hundreds of years. But the first main one, I think the main one was the San Paolo alle Tre Fontane, or the St. Paul at the Three Fountains.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was built in the 5th century.
So, okay, they literally have mythologized this stuff so much. They've literally made natural resources like springs into stories of how those springs even
Right.
sprung up by using apostles. It's just fascinating how quickly something like this is fabricated. And he had milk come out. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
no blood, it's just milk. Doesn't even say blood with milk. Like the Gospels at least say blood and water when the spear went through Jesus' side. It's just milk.
Like Paul's Milky Neck, man. It sounds like a punk rock band.
Dude, this is crazy.
So before I get a whole bunch of Christians climbing all over me, I do want to mention that there is an earlier text. First Clement writes about it in First Clement 5:4-6, but doesn't say anything about his martyrdom. All it says is that he departed from the world and went into the holy place, having been found a notable pattern of patience and endurance. That is all that it says. So it does imply that he died and went to the happy ever after, but no mention of martyrdom, no mention of, I mean, so it talked about his oppression before. You know, Paul talks about he's been stoned, he's been shipwrecked, he's preached here, preached there, been in prison, yada yada.
Yeah.
First Clement is patting him on the back, and they say all of that, but no martyrdom. Doesn't even say that it was in Rome. It doesn't say he was beheaded. None of that. And then of course you got Stephen and Barnabas, but they aren't apostles, so we don't have to talk about them.
Well, this seems like a fitting time to close on this subject.
It's a lot, man. I apologize.
No. But this is, it's interesting to just show how reliable can you really be to sit here and say, well, we know this, we know that. Oh yeah, no, why would people die for something they don't believe in? Well, people create stories about stuff like this as well. So to say what is and what isn't, it's all written in these books. It's apologetic in nature to try and make those cases. So I love what you did, though. You point out a lot of interesting things, mostly contradictory. And I think most Christians will agree that most of the stuff's contradictory. A lot of the people who are Protestant will go, well, this is why we disagree with church tradition. But they don't realize how much they use or borrow from the church. They might disregard these stories right here, but there's still so much that's still handed down in the way they believe. I mean, most of these churches still have to believe in a literal physical this or the physical resurrection, or Jesus had to have literally physically rose from the dead, when Paul has a spiritual kind of resurrection idea. Like, you know, I mean, it's all orthodoxy still to some degree.
Well, and I just want to say that I was that in doing this, like I would say that I was charitable in my representation of the actual textual evidence, actual textual tradition of it. But I encourage anybody who's watching this and they don't like what they see, or they don't like my characterization of a certain apostle's martyrdom, then I challenge you, I beseech you to go and find a better source that will fit your narrative. And I can promise you, you will not find it, but you are welcome to try.
I love it. There's a challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Majors. Go down in the description. Join his YouTube channel. Make sure you hit him up on Twitter. Unless you're trying to harass him, of course, don't do that. But
do it.
He's got so much more. We're going to be having him on with Dr. Joshua Bowen here soon, which is going to be really delightful, talking about fellow prophecy from Jeremiah to Daniel. Oh man, that's going to be fun, because you know me and prophecy, dude.
Oh, I'm stoked about it, and I've talked with Dr. Josh about it already, and we're both just thrilled to come on.
I love it, man. And then we got to get you on sometime after Josh comes on and talks about his Daniel stuff on the channel. And then you can come piggyback on that and talk about your information if you're interested. Of course, we don't want to give away your dissertation completely, but you could talk about some stuff about it. And I think it's fascinating information. I'd like to learn from you, brother. So thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it, brother.
Thanks so much for having me, Mr. Lambert. It's been a pleasure.
Of course, brother. And if you guys haven't figured it out by now, we are MythVision.